Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Deeply Graphic Design Cast. I'm Nick Longo, your host today, and guess what we're tackling? We're tackling something that has been asked many times over the last few months, and that is how to price with confidence. I know this is one of those ones where it's a really tough one if you're new to freelancing or if you're new to a small business. Pricing is that one threshold that I always fear, and I hear about it all the time from young designers, and I did as well. I still to this day don't feel like I'm 1000% confident on this stuff, but what I do know is I have tried some things in the past that have really boosted my confidence, that I feel so much more better and confident in producing and putting together the proposal and presenting it with this kind of like, yes, this is it. Like, I mean, take it or leave it. I'm not giving you discounts. We're not budging. This is how we price for what we do. And that kind of confidence is so well needed, particularly in anybody that's starting out. So I'm trying to hope that this could be a way to put that confidence and that kind of like that strength back into doing it. Because again, I get it. It's daunting. This is your money. This is how you make a living. And if you haven't done this before, we're going to talk all about different practices. You've got hourly rates, you've got value-based, you've got retainers, you've got licensing. You've got all different kinds of things to consider as you're doing this. So this is how we're going to help you stop second guessing yourself and start making what you're worth. What you're going to learn a little bit in this episode is how to choose the right pricing model for the project that you're doing, when to charge hourly, how to charge either value-based or one price fee, and how retainers can create a little bit of stability with you and your clients. Also want to talk a little bit about avoiding some of the common pricing mistakes, why most designers undercharge, and how to shift that mindset to charge what you deserve. And lastly, we'll go over some pro tips on confidence for pricing conversations, how to present this client to a client without fear, without hesitation, or lowballing yourself. That's the one thing I remember doing all the time was I'd put that number together, and before I hit send, I'd knock a little bit off just thinking, oh, that'll increase my chances. I have reversed that. And I think that's the best thing I can tell you about how some of these tips have really broadened what I can do and how confident I feel with my pricing now. So understanding the pros and cons of hourly. Hourly pricing is great for tracking time, but it often caps the earning potential that you could have. So you'd use it on projects where it's a little bit unclear about the scope because it's going to set a minimum number of hours to ensure some profitability. That's a tip that I would say if you're going this hourly route and that's the way you feel most confident with a new client, the best thing to do is make sure you have set a minimum number of those hours just to ensure that this is worth green lighting. Okay. There is going to be some profitability here. Never, ever start a pricing one without some commitment on 10, 15, 20 hours for whatever that project is. That's the best way I think you could do it. I find that when pricing goes hourly or a client wants to know your hourly and base it that way, they're not valuing the work. They're not valuing your expertise. They are more concerned about price and budget. And yes, they should be. And I'm not saying that, these people should just blindly trust you. But if you do the tactics we're going to talk about, they will trust you because you're telling them more than just a number or however many hours you are working on. Think about if you've put this together and you haven't created a minimum amount and you're 3 hours in and the client stops and says, I can't afford any more. Now everyone's wasted each other's time. There's no end result. There's no design they're going to use because it's not finished. They feel frustrated because they've paid you something and they got nothing. And in some cases, I've heard of terrible horror stories where if that payment wasn't made yet, or you just said, we'll pay at the end of this thing, everyone's screwed on that kind of thing. So many times it works as the beginning. It works as a great way to kind of get you used to kind of asking for a price or a proposal or an estimate. I'm going to show you how I think it's better to go a whole other way and how you can shift out of it. I haven't done hourly in forever, but what I do to make sure my value basing is good is it's based on an hourly structure, but it's behind the scenes. And I'll tell you about that in this next section. We're going to talk now about shifting to a value-based pricing when possible. I completely misinterpreted value-based pricing when someone brought that up to me many, many years ago about asking me like how I priced as a business. And they said they take the value way, value-based. So value-based did not sound like optimistic. It sounded value. I thought maybe it sounded like when I think of value, I think of lower cost or I think of cheap. It's totally different. What it is it's basically, think of it this way. Instead of charging for time, you're charging for the impact of your work. When you are producing something for them, you're giving them something that's going to help generate revenue. That's worth more than just hours spent designing something, right? There's something so valuable that you're giving them. That's what they mean by value-based. It's what you give them that's going to help generate and create impact for the work you've created to their business. So how I started looking at this was, I'm creating typically usually something that is the entire skin of the company, right? It is the logo. It is the logo collection. It is the tagline. It's the color palette. It might be patterns. It might be a ton of packaging for it. If it's a restaurant, it's the entire experience of walking in there. That's what people use to even decide if they're going to buy, purchase, click, subscribe, whatever it is. It's what are they getting? What is the feel from the design that's seeing there? That's worth so much. That's the impact that you're creating. So that value is what they're buying. So what I did, going back to the last one about hourlies and how they play a part in my value-based pricing, what I do is we first list out the entire scope of this project. And I have them kind of approve that. I'm like, is this everything? Everything from, onboarding, research and development, right? Mood boards, first round concepts, revisions, finals, print ready, being the liaison with their printer, all those things, right? The connection that you're doing. Then it might just be 2 or 3 signage things, some window art, whatever it might be, a mural on the inside. Okay, awesome. We got that all together. Now what I do is I look at all of that, and then at the very end, I add the rights of ownership. That means I'm handing over the IP. What I've designed for them is now their ownership. I no longer own this art. So that to me is one of the best things I've ever done, because now I feel not only feeling more confident in producing this better proposal, but this rights of ownership is telling them, oh, I own this. This is no longer Nick's. This is not Longo Designs. We now own this thing. And that's what you're doing. You're giving them the rights to use it in any way, shape, or form. Get paid for that. That's awesome. Okay, we got this whole scope, right? Now I apply how many hours each one of these is going to use. This is all now behind the scenes. This is all behind the curtain. I don't show them an hourly. I don't show them how many hours that's going to take. I don't want to talk that language with them. I want to talk value. So in the background, I'm putting all the hours to that every line of entry on that scope of services. Then I multiply it times what my hourly is that only I have. I don't publicize it. I don't put it out there. And that fluctuates. If this is a big company, Nick's using the highest one on the list, right? If this is a more kind of like grassroots neighborhood brand or something, and I do want to like be a good partner to them, I have a different hourly for those as well. So you can be flexible there. Then you come up with the full amount. And what you can do is, each tier you can say, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 for this, print files and everything, another 1,500, whatever. They came from your hourly, but all you're doing is structuring it in a way so now they see, whoa, I'm getting a lot from Longo Designs. There's so much here, and he's showed me every line item and what it means and what its value is. My proposals go to like 3 pages. Then you got your whole agreement stuff. That's something totally different. But the proposals, I want them to be no questions, right? Crystal clear. I get everything here and why that number at the very bottom is that number at the very bottom. So there I'm feeling like when I present this to them, I'm getting very little pushback, if anything. And if there is pushback, it's a lot, right? It's usually a client that goes, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. I'll show you a little bit later on this, how you avoid that situation, because that was happening far too often for me. I'll give you the secret on how that no longer happens in one of the next steps. But now I've done this. They like that. There's no surprises. That's the price. And we're going to get into the contract and everything else about how it's paid. But now I know they're appreciating the value I'm bringing in this thing. So that's how you shift over there as well. You are showing them the value of generating revenue and money, and that is well worth more than hours spent designing it. It also is really interesting to think. I remember I had a teacher that said she did a tagline and a logo design for a friend in like half a day, right? And it just was perfect. This is after 30 years of being a designer and a brand specialist. And her friend just said something like, "Oh, thank God it only took you half a day. I was afraid how much it was going to cost." And she said something like, "Just because I did it in half a day doesn't mean it's any less of a good solution for you." And I'll never forget, she told us that, and I was like still a senior in college. And now I tell my students that all the time, because you shouldn't be penalized if something you've created that is magic, you're good enough to create it in a short amount of time. So always remember that it's the value you bring, not the amount of hours you are putting into this project. So try to make that shift in your next project and see what happens. Okay, next let's talk a little bit about the retainer pricing. So retainers are where you put a monthly kind of charge to work with you and have services to a certain amount of hours for that month. And what that means is you now have the stability. You're like, great, I know I'm making this amount from this company for however many months you've put together in the agreement. And they get predictability because as far as budget and costs go, they know that they're only going to be charged by you this amount, and they have figured that out in their budget. So great for everybody there. Retainers are ideal for good long-term clients who need ongoing work. So think of brands or companies or projects that you've worked with that include a lot of social media graphics on a daily basis. Maybe it's a company that has tons of brand assets and menus and things like that that need to be changed on a monthly basis or a daily basis in some of those cases. So it's really great for those projects or clients that you have that there's a lot of ongoing work for it. You structure it around a set number of hours or deliverables that you will be producing for them per month. And how I've done it in the past was I looked at a client and I said, well, we're technically working about 25 hours for you a month. How does that sound as a beginning kind of rate? Should we cap it off there? Then you can say for that amount of time, maybe it's going to be $3,000 for that month. And that way they can plan on it, they can budget for it. And now everyone feels like they're winning here, okay? Stability and credibility. Now you can say, let's get working and see how it works. If any month, there's usually, most people do is they'll put a plus or minus into that and say if it goes plus or minus 4 to 5% for a few months in a row, let's reevaluate our numbers. Because if we're not sticking to the amount of hours we agreed on, now someone's losing. It might be you if the hours go up, and it might be them if the hours go down. So what I always love to say is I will evaluate how we're doing on this, and if we ever have to go over for 2 to 3 months consistently, we'll have to reevaluate it. And same way if it went less hours. That way they know you're looking at it and it's helping both sides. Because again, if it goes lower, they're obviously paying more hours than you're actually doing. And you want to be open, honest, and kind of making sure you're crystal clear on that. I think that's just a better partnership when it comes to it. So retainers are interesting. They really do customize to a good client that is looking for that stability, and you're looking for profitability and security. It really works out in a lot of ways. But again, I think sometimes they're harder to nail down in this day and age because so many companies unfortunately don't think so far in advance. And if you're doing that and you're offering this retainer to someone and they are very interested in it, you've just struck gold, because that makes a perfect partnership between the two of you. Next up, let's talk a little bit about licensing pricing. This is for, best way to say it is charge for usage, not just creation. Okay. So in most cases, everything I don't do much in licensing. Because what I'm doing is I'm putting together that value-based pricing plus the rights of ownership, and that's legit. If I get paid, we're done, right? We're good. Everybody's good. We're even. They've paid off the bill in full. If you look at licensing, it's great when you're designing things that are technically like illustrations or digital assets or things that they'll use to help sell their business, right? I think t-shirts are the best way to talk about it. If you created something beautiful and it's a beautiful illustration or something really cool that they are using in a shop and they're putting out to sell, within their store or whatever it might be. Where I've seen a lot of people kind of introduce themselves into it with their clients is if they estimate and put together a proposal for a design for, let's say, a t-shirt, and the client might write back and be like, we're nowhere near that budget. And I think maybe it just can't do it at that particular high rate. You can now come in and say, okay, totally understand. Here's my solution. Let's knock off the fee. Maybe you knock it off 50%, and that feels a little bit more attractive to them. But then you can say, I would like a percentage of the profit you make on every sale of that t-shirt. So if they sell a lot and it does really, really well, and you can get 3, 4, 5% of the profit from each one they sold, now you're getting paid to make up for what you said you couldn't do at the beginning, right? Why you lowered the price. Something can really take off and be really, really like successful. And imagine the jackpot at the end of that thing. And I think also it means you put that extra effort and that extra time into something like that. Because again, not to say you don't do it for everything else, but again, it could be that thing that could really take off. And I've seen, and I know plenty of people that work under this situation and this kind of structure, and it has paid off fantastic for them because again, they're getting something from the back end. The other thing you can consider doing if you are going to do the retainer thing is to make sure you are limiting the thing on how it's going to be used. So let's say you did that illustration for the t-shirt. You can say, well, there's a few things I want to consider here. Is this going to be regional or global, right? Meaning, is it available only here in the States or the country you live in, or it will be online or virtual and global to other people? So there's some factors you consider about the percentage that you're looking at. So you can say, I only have agreed to regional rights. If it goes to global, that's a whole other deal, right? Online versus print, that's another way as well. Print, obviously could be something just like the t-shirt, but an online sale of that thing that you've created, that could go crazy because of the convenience and the fact that it's just one click away and they're buying a digital asset rather than a physical piece. So that's a whole other thing as well. Then there's also duration of use. How long can they use that art for that product that they're talking about? One thing I know is there was a friend of mine that did one where he didn't specify the usage of the actual art. Meaning they took it and said it was for a t-shirt, but then eventually they now took it and put it on a poster and put it on a program, and the contract had nothing about that on there, and they took it and used it and did not pay him usage or licensing for it there. So you need to specify that it's only good for what we've talked about here. If you want to use it for any other thing, we have to renegotiate that contract to make sure you're getting covered, because that has happened. And they didn't do it kind of like, like meanful. They did it in a way because they didn't they just thought, oh, I guess we can use this for everything, because they didn't specify that it was only supposed to be used on a t-shirt. So always keep that in mind. Usage, how much it's going to be out there. That way you can kind of predict a better percentage when you are putting together that licensing fee. Next up, let's talk a little bit about overhead and expenses. Your rate should always cover the things that are your overhead or your expenses, because those are things that you are basically paying to run your business. And that's everything. That is all of your softwares, all of your subscription, all of your hardware, anything that you've bought within your offices that you need, health insurance, admin time. All of these things are things that help run your business. And you've got to factor that in there, because without that, you're just factoring a salary for you. But if you have a full-time job, you're getting benefits, you're getting all those things, you're being provided the equipment, the office space, and everything else. So if you think of it that way, you've got to incorporate that into your pricing somehow. So a good rule of thumb in your expenses and all those things is to kind of think of a ideal yearly salary that you would like to make particularly if you were even employed. What did you make per year? Or what do you want to make per year as a freelance or a contracted designer? I hate the word freelance. So as an independent designer for hire. Does that sound better? I don't know. So here's the deal. You want to take that ideal salary that you do want to make as this artist and increase it by 2 to 3x. 2 is a great starting point. So if you want to make, let's say, $100,000 per year, try to shoot for that $200,000. That's one of those things to kind of like cover business costs the time spent outside client work, all those other things. So if you shoot for that as you're like breaking down that 200,000. So let's say that $200,000 is now your new goal. That's how you can factor in your hourly of what you need to make per hour to catch that kind of a salary. And there's how you can put your pricing together. Don't do it for just the fee of you. Do it for the fee of everything else that comes with just living, right? So keep that in mind. That's your best way to kind of like cover all those extra business costs and the time you spent outside of client work. All right. Next up is tiered pricing. This is for better client buy-in. In some cases, let's say you're putting together a logo package and there's a entry that most people think it's just going to be a logo, maybe a few versions of it, and the assets. That's number one. Let's say you expand it a little bit more, and now you've done a full brand identity, and that is brand identity, logo collection, maybe color palettes and patterns. Great. Maybe a few photography things in there, put in, awesome. That's number two. Number three would be a whole package that is all of that, plus brand strategy, even a workshop, maybe even working with their team on how to use the brand in different components if they're going to be using the brand kind of turnover package, let's say. So there's those three groups. That's a neat way to deliver when you are putting your pricing together. So offer a 3 pricing tier. This is great for new clients. This is great for new artists as well. If you've never done this and you're feeling a little unclear or unsure about the numbers you're presenting to them, try this thing. And you see it everywhere, particularly online. When you're choosing a plan or something, they'll give you the A, B, and C, kind of basic, standard, and premium. What you want to do is give your clients all these options, but you're anchoring them towards the better value and the full one, that package that has everything. So like I said, imagine if you showed them that and they're like, wow, I'd be foolish to get all this stuff and not have more work, more designs, more branding, and that training session that my whole team will be a part of. And Nick will walk us through that entire thing as he hands over the package to us. That's a great way of seeing if they'll stretch and see if there's something more that they want. Don't be surprised if they pick the basic or even the standard one. The premium one is what you're aiming to a little bit, or like nudging them a little bit to. But don't forget, if you got them in on the basic one, that's a win. Now you can kind of do phase 2 for any of those other packages. So in some ways, they're going to pay for it. You're just giving them the choice of, do they pay for it up front and you anchor more work from that client at the very beginning, or the possibility of just doing it afterwards. So think of that tier structure, because it's something really cool. I see it a lot in design subscription, people that kind of offer design subscriptions to a client and they have those tiers, but it doesn't have to be that kind of complicated. It could be much more simple in the way you're just presenting that first project to a client. Give them some choices and see where they go. I think it works every time. All right. I told you there was a way of like kind of making sure that I didn't have that problem anymore about invoice going out to someone and then being shocked, going, oh, whoa, this is not what I was expecting. Before we even get there, you have to do one thing: set a minimum engagement price with anybody you are talking with. Before you've even you invest in the 30-minute phone call talking with them or whatever it might be. Maybe that's the perfect time to offer this. But I love this idea. It's like most companies will have that kind of thing. There's a minimum to get into the door, or whatever it might be, whatever they're selling, right? Could be, you name it, cars, homes, whatever. You can't just go in there and just hope it's going to be the price point that your budget is. You got to promote what that's going to be and tell them. So how you can avoid a small or low paying project is by establishing this minimum engagement rate. It's a great way to say it too. It's not just, don't say I have a minimum. Say I have a minimum engagement rate. You have to. I mean, to keep the lights on, to keep your business going, to make a livelihood and a living out of what you do, you have to have some kind of thing there. And I always say, like, hey, just to let you know from the very beginning, I have a minimum engagement rate of X. Let's say it's $5,000, $10,000, whatever it might be. Okay. You know your number. I think be aggressive with that too. Don't shortchange yourself on this one. What will it take to engage a new project with you that's going to be planted on your calendar and take your time, right? It's a good way to kind of make sure you're a good fit, they're a good fit for you. So you start that rate, let them know for upfront what it is. And this will help kind of filter out the clients who are more price focused. And that happens a lot still to this day, right? And I think a lot of times for me, it's if I've got them past that threshold, it tells me that they do want and they value great design, and they've already told me that in just their way of kind of agreeing to what that minimum might be. So think of that as something to do at the very beginning. Again, don't let it be a surprise later down the road, because again, you don't want to throw out a budget or an estimate and have them just kind of like gasp. You want it to be in the range that they're going to understand and kind of expect, because you've had this conversation with them. So keep that in mind. It's a great way to kind of eliminate a lot of that kind of craziness afterwards. All right, next up, we got to talk a little bit about deposit and milestone payments, okay? If there's one thing you take away from this thing, and I've had so many young designers and some of my students have gone out and done some work for people, and they have forgotten one important thing, and that is the deposit and the milestones of how you're going to pay. Here's a golden rule. 50% upfront, 25% midway, 25% at delivery. This is a common structure that many people use. I know some people that are so bullish and they are so, God bless them, they're killing it in their careers. Some of them ask for 100% upfront. That's obviously a great goal for all of us to consider. But mine is now 50%, and I use this structure with every project that's new. Okay, new projects for sure. Then let's say that this same existing client comes back to you with a brand new project. It's up to you to kind of figure out, do you want to do it with the 50% thing again, or do you go to a 33, 33, 33? It's up to you on how you want to do it. But the first one, make sure that your agreement and your structure says there is a 50% upfront. Make it clear up front. That should be in all of your upfront proposals and everything. This keeps cash flow steady and prevents ghosting or non-payment issues. Particularly, like, you can say the 50% is non-refundable. That's what I do. So first, I know that if there is some ghosting thing, or if they cancel the project at a certain point, I know that 50% is half the time. In most cases, any of those situations happen just short of maybe midway. So I'm covered. I've already got the money for the time spent. I never want to be in that position where more time has gone out than what I've paid for. Those things still happen even with the best of clients. And again, sometimes it's not their fault. It might be something about funding or something like that. But if they do not agree on that, that is a big red flag to consider. So just keep that in mind. It's up to you on how you say yes or no with those things. And again, it's a great way to get comfortable with talking about pricing. One, you've told them your minimum. Two, you've told them there's a 50% upfront before we get rolling on these things. That alone should just give you the confidence in putting better pricing together, because you're protecting yourself, but you're also protecting them. So keep that in mind. Next up, test and adjust your rates regularly. If a client says yes too quickly, your prices might be too low. I've gone through that so many times where I was getting yes, yes, yes. And I didn't want to break that streak, right? I wanted it to keep going, and I stayed there. And then I just thought, I was hearing some other people, and great thing to do with other designers is have a few that you can talk to transparently about pricing and everything like that. You might hear someone much lower than you, but you might hear someone much higher than you. And that's great to hear, because now that's giving me the confidence to say, wow, I've gotten a lot of yeses in the last few months. Maybe I should raise my prices a little bit. So some of the golden rules are try increasing rates by 10 to 20% every few projects until you find a strong balance of demand and income. Because when I was first asked by someone that I think I quoted, they said no. They came back to me a few months or maybe a year later and thought that price was still kind of good, right? And I said, unfortunately, it's not. I have to send you a new one. And they said, how is that? And I'm like, well, they said something like, did you get better? And like jokingly. And I said, yeah, we have. Definitely. But also my demand has gone much higher. Those blocks on my calendar are harder to fill. And how would I do it? I have to make sure there's some way to qualify to get on there. So like everything else in life, the prices do go up if the demand goes up. So having these reasons and having this rationale behind all of these answers I gave to these questions made me so much more confident, but it was also more like, absolutely, like it was beyond confidence. Now it's like, that's what it's going to take to work with us. And it's just a great feeling to have. And I hope everyone can use some of these points to kind of get you there. Confidence is key. You got to know your worth here, and they could be going anywhere, right? And you've got them, you're talking to them. This is the way to present your pricing in a way that matters more than just the numbers itself. You're talking more about the value. You're talking all about the things you're going to do for them. How will you move the needle for them? If you need to, go back to other projects that you've done and talk about your worth on that project. Did it do something better? Did it improve sales? Did it increase their visibility? Did that rebrand you did for them increase sales to the point where they were like, whoa, like this has changed the game for us? Use those bits and pieces in how you're presenting there as well. And instead of saying my price is $5,000, is that okay? You want to say this project investment is $5,000 and here's what it includes. So listen to the difference there. My price is $5,000. Is that okay? Not the best way to present it. What you want to do is change the whole perception. The project investment, not price, is $5,000 and here's what it will include. You do that, and I'm telling you, your confidence level will go through, but also your rate of yes or no will change too. I feel like the yes happens more, not just because of my work getting better and the case studies I can show about them, but it's that confidence you bring that they feel safer going with someone that comes in with that amount of strength and confidence in the work that they're going to produce for them. So pricing your design work isn't just about these numbers. I want you to make sure it's always including the understanding of your value, setting boundaries, and owning your worth. What you do as a designer is so valuable to them. If they could do it, they do it, right? They can't. They're coming to you for this expertise. The right clients will respect you for that. So the next time you send out a quote, don't just think of it as how much time it will take. Think about it as how much impact your work will have for them. Confidence is everything, guys. I'm telling you. So I'd love to hear from you guys. If you have struggled with any of these situations in pricing, please let me know. If you found a method that's better or that's worked for you, let me know as well. We'll drop it into some notes into the next project or the next podcast, and just keep that conversation going with the people that you know. Hit me up on socials or leave a comment wherever you're listening. Again, I'd love to hear good stories, horror stories, whatever it might be, and maybe we can base this on a new episode later down the road and talk more about those points, because it still is one of those silent but most talked about little topics when it comes to anybody in the service business or setting their own pricing and their own hourlies. I get it. It's a real tough thing to do, but hopefully this is giving you some confidence to try something different, and there are options. So keep designing, keep growing, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.